Last time we talked about how urban redesign and ecosystem restoration can Edenize LA to prevent future fires. And at the end, I left you with the question, where will we find the political will to actually Edenize LA and other cities? So in today's episode, we'll look at California's Marshall Plan to rebuild after the fires, how to Edenize that plan, the power of political will with some examples from around the world, and what people can do to grow political will wherever they may be today. Welcome to Edenicity, best practices for sustainably abundant cities. Let's start with California Governor Gavin Newsom's so-called Marshall Plan to build back after the fires. This is modeled after the Marshall Plan that the United States began in 1948 to help Western Europe rebuild after World War II. The purpose of the Marshall Plan was to aid in the economic recovery of nations after World War II and secure U.S. geopolitical influence over Western Europe. The total foreign aid came to $13 billion, equivalent to $174 billion today. In the case of Governor Newsom's plan, the total comes out to about $2.5 billion. And to summarize many press releases and proclamations, the plan involves boosting emergency response, fast-tracking temporary housing, bypassing environmental and other regulations to speed reconstruction, tax and mortgage relief for survivors, increased legal protections against price gouging and other scams that survivors may face, and the hardening of individual properties, using things like clear zones around the houses. Some parts of this plan were already in motion as the governor's office saw dangers increasing, and they'd certainly been working on disaster preparedness for quite some time. But the January 2025 fires did not happen in a vacuum. They happened at a time of housing market failure, with a lack of affordability and availability of housing throughout California and much of the rest of the United States, as I've discussed in prior episodes. There's also been an ongoing insurance crisis where, according to Newsweek, 7 out of 12 of the Golden State's top insurers, the ones with the biggest market share, cut coverage in the state over the past 4 years. As a result, California's FAIR Plan, which offers fire insurance to those who can't find it in the traditional market, is becoming the insurer of first resort rather than last resort for many. Put another way, the insurance crisis threatens to unravel the social contract behind mortgages. And so the state's doing this sensible thing by stepping in to cover a market failure. But on top of this market failure, there's an ecological failure. Cities in the U.S. face fires, storms, floods, even dust storms, as I pointed out in episode 102, as well as food and energy insecurity that are worsening due to new immigration policies which could reduce migrant labor, tariffs on many imports, and a shift away from the renewable energy resources that the U.S. has in incredible abundance compared to many other nations. And of course, for a very long time, most cities have fallen victim to pollution, noise, and the atomization of our personal lives due to a car-dependent design that moves us physically very far away from one another. As I've pointed out in several prior episodes, anywhere between 50 and 80% of many cities is devoted to roads, parking, green strips, and setbacks to maintain a boundary between our personal lives and dangerous car traffic. It should be fairly obvious by now that this is a situation that requires much more than a fast response or even preparation for any specific disaster. No, these challenges are best addressed together. And here's how. We can Edenize cities with permeable landscapes and layered plantings, multifamily mixed-use, transit-oriented social housing, and I'll get to the details of why social housing in a moment, renewable energy, and local food production, all of which I provided an example of in episode 139, as well as many prior episodes. But okay, if this is the goal, what are the specific governmental mechanisms that get us there? Now, based on evidence that I'm going to present later in this video, the best way that cities can Edenize is to have a unified redevelopment agency for planning, insurance, construction, and relocation services. This would ensure residents, maybe through a special extension of the FAIR Plan in California. It would have an Edenicity plan. And if you're curious about that, there's an Edenicity land use concept that you can download in the description below this episode. See that little link that says more ... The redevelopment agency would also have an opt-in to consolidate disaster relief and other claims. And this is very important. It would pre-qualify developers for the Edenicity plan so that the moment something happens, the plan already exists, the developers already have access to it, and the work and the subsequent payments can begin immediately. The agency would promptly rehouse displaced residents to built-to-order Edenicity units of equivalent value to what they lost. And we'll get into built-to-order in a moment. But the question is, where's the political will to build such an agency? Well, just to give you a sense of the power of political will, I was walking with a friend on a beautiful day in 2000, admiring the view of the nearby San Gabriel Mountains. And he told me a funny story. Back in the early 80s when he attended Caltech, he said you could always tell who the freshmen were because they'd be the ones standing like deer in the headlights, staring at the San Gabriels. Because as far as they knew, there had never been mountains there. You see, back in the 80s, there was so much smog that the mountains were only visible for just a handful of days every year, which was the reverse of the situation when I lived there. There were maybe 5 or 6 days a year when there was enough smog to slightly obscure the view. What made the difference? Of course, California's stringent governmental emission standards. And these regulations are not merely cosmetic, although that would be reason enough. According to a 2013 MIT study, even in 2013, there were twice as many deaths due to air pollution from cars as there were from car crashes, and it was exponentially worse before the emission standards went into effect. Another example of political will is Vienna, which in 1923 was still half destroyed from World War I and crammed with widespread poverty and slums. By 2025, it had been named the most livable city in the world by Mercer, The Economist, and numerous other organizations for decades. Similarly, Singapore in 1965 was destitute. Per capita spending power was about a sixth that of the United States. It was crammed with slums, fires, three-way race riots. It was a complete mess. But by 2000, they matched the U.S. level of wealth, and today, not even counting their real estate holdings, 1 out of 6 Singaporeans is a millionaire. How was this possible? In both cases, of course, there were a range of policies, but the centerpiece, the self-acknowledged focus by the city's leaders going back to the beginnings of these policies, was social housing. In the case of Singapore, the city-state began building housing immediately after the worst of those early riots. And even today, 81% of the population lives in social housing, which is often of such high quality that it can resell at 7 years for 2 times the purchase price. Vienna, meanwhile, has a policy where there's no bad neighborhoods, as I've discussed in a prior episode. And the way they do this is by building social housing in every single neighborhood. Now, in Vienna's case, these are rental flats, but they are held for a really long time and are of such high quality that even when people's incomes rise beyond the qualifying mark, the vast majority of social housing residents decide to remain in their apartments. Now, in addition to social housing, both cities have high-quality public transportation, and Singapore in particular discourages the use of cars at all. Now, organizationally, in both cases, they manage this by consolidating government agencies into, in Singapore's case, a sole agency, its Housing Development Board, and in Vienna's case, Wiener Wohnen, which builds municipal housing, and Woonfonds Wien, which manages the subsidized housing that are built by third-party developers. Because the government role in both situations is strong, the governments can offer favorable terms to both residents and developers. Now, if you're wondering how these programs worked in detail, for example, how they were paid for, you can check out my book, Housing in 4 Cities, from the link in the description. But this is how at least 2 world cities have made quality housing in high-quality neighborhoods widely available. But again, where does the political will to do these things come from? In a word, trust. The governments of Vienna and Singapore delivered promptly on their promises and worked hard to understand people's needs and even fears. In the case of Vienna, they hold developer competitions with prospective residents among the jury. In the case of Singapore's HDB, they have built-to-order flats where residents can actually go and select from many custom features before the flat is actually built for them. And if I understand correctly, some elements of this have found their way into Vienna's smart housing initiative. But of course, any big political change faces opposition, so you might be curious how Singapore in particular dealt with that. Let me read you a paragraph from my book. When it looks like there might be community opposition to a project, HDB recruited resident members of parliament to rebuild grassroots support. Originally, it was tough persuading people to move to high-rises. People were scared of getting stuck in elevators. And according to Singapore's tells mega architect Loathe, the key is good lift or elevator management. In the late 1970s, computer software checked every lift in the nation every 5 seconds. People living in the slums were also concerned that their villages would be torn apart if they were put in social housing, because then grandma might not live in the same house, but instead across town. So pains were taken to make sure that the villages were relocated together and the people had adequate room, and they were rehoused in economically vital places as close to town centers as possible so that they would not be shut out of economic opportunity. When you listen to the architects of Singapore and Vienna's social housing, the word trust just comes up over and over again in the context of what the government has to do to earn people's trust. And that's because trust, and unfortunately its opposite, grows through sustained networking, education, and organization. Project 2025 is part of a century-long coordinated effort by corporations to weaken and capture government, according to Naomi Oreskes and Erik M. Conway's book, The Big Myth, which I've linked in the description. So given that governments can earn political will and that political will can be sabotaged by very powerful players, where does that leave individuals and communities that want to Edenize? In other words, how can you build political will? Based on my direct experiences, the answer is to live green with people and build figurative bridges. Sustainable living centers, co-op houses, green neighborhood associations, and apartment eco-villages can build political will by hosting a full calendar of activities and educational events, as I discussed in episode 105 and outlined in the Greener Village Blueprint, which is linked in the description below. I can't emphasize enough how important this is. If you have an eco-village and you want that way of life to last in a city, let alone spread, you need to reach out to your neighbors. When I was involved in co-founding the Green Acres Eco-Village in Bloomington, Indiana, the neighborhood association held weekly events where we had potlucks and gardening days in the community garden, and monthly events where people from around town could actually join us to learn about permaculture, gardening, pond building, composting, mushroom inoculation, and many other things. Now, these events were successful in building awareness and appreciation for green lifestyles. And what made them even more effective was the strategic partnerships that we built with the city government, the university, and organizations throughout the city. So, for example, I wrote a bunch of grant proposals for neighborhood cleanups. We got the university involved in building composting and tree planting projects. We may have had some joint activities with other organizations in town, such as the Sustainable Living Center. And of course, activism and volunteerism are part and parcel to all of these activities. Now, the power of this really becomes apparent when big issues need to be decided. The city of Bloomington was looking at some green initiatives and was holding hearings at city council. Because the university had already been teaching permaculture for many years, and because we had turned a neighborhood adjacent to the university into an eco-village with strong ties to the university, when the call went out to have people show up at City Hall, in a town of just 38,000 people, we had 200 people show up for the meeting. When somebody asked how many of you have taken a permaculture course, nearly every hand had gone up. By the way, if you're not familiar with permaculture, it's an ecological design system to meet human needs while healing rather than harming the planet, and has about 1 million certified designers worldwide. Now, in the case of Kailash Eco Village in Portland, Oregon, pictured here, it's no coincidence that the walk score is 83 and the bike score is 96. This only happens when a community that wants bicycles is very well represented at the city level. It's also no coincidence that they were able to get their composting system and humanure composting system, yes, that's human waste composting, permitted within city limits. And again, this involved not only partnerships with the city, but also within academia to do the studies necessary to permit it. And remember, this is just one eco-village in a really big city. Imagine what could be done as eco-villages begin to spread, as Kailash has done with its new extension Annapurna, and gaining even more influence within a city. There's no shortcuts. This is how we can begin to Edenize a city. Okay, here's links to some of those episodes I mentioned. And thanks so much, as always, to the wonderful patrons who have made this work possible. Take care, stay green, see you next time.